Hi, everyone. Julie Rudolph here from Divergent Rehab and Wellness. I am here again with Kyle, Coach L from Freedom Run Club in Florida. So today we thought we were discussing nutrition is such a big thing. So we decided to start a mini series. This first topic that we're going to cover today is going to be pretty much an overview of nutrition, focus or more geared toward the runner. So let's just dive right in there. So Kyle he's got a lot of experience with nutrition. He's taken courses and he has certifications. I myself, I kind of dabble with things with what I've read. I've met with sports dietitian nutritionists. So I'm going to lean here on Kyle a little bit more and throw some questions out at him. So first, Kyle, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic, Julie. How are you?
I'm doing well. Things are going good. So, all right, so let's try to keep it as simple as we can. Now you think about your difference between a runner, someone who lifts weights, someone who doesn't, really isn't as active. Nutrition and what they're doing for the nutrition, it just varies. And let's focus obviously more on the runner. So can you just tell me generally what we should be looking out for, when you're starting to get more into running?
Definitely. And a lot of times I'll have one of my runners ask me what they should be running, what they should be eating, that kind of thing for it. And typically they're coming from a knowledge base of what you'll see on social media right now, which is very much heavy on protein being the most important of what we'd call a macronutrient, which are where we're getting calories from, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are typically thought of as more of bad. That really needs to be reshaped if we're looking at someone who's really trying to get into running, maybe for the first time. Carbohydrates are our friend when we're looking to run.
Hey, thank you for coming to check out our video here today. If you would like to learn more about rehab and running, feel free to check out our Skool community, which you can find in the description below.
I guess for the general population that maybe is struggling to get to 6,000 steps a day, that might make sense to limit carbohydrates because carbohydrates is what your body is preferred to use when you're actually moving, when you're actually running, when you're trying to get into these things, and when you're trying to build muscles as well. But I always have to change their mentality because that's what you see is to de-emphasize carbohydrates. That is your body's primary fuel source, and that's really what you want to look to fuel, especially for a run, when you're getting into running to recharge. We can only store a limited amount of carbohydrates, and that's what our body uses to run fast. So I want to start there. So essentially, the general guidelines that are set in place for a healthy individual is to get between 45 and 55% of their calories from carbohydrates. That's going to be on the higher end for someone that's a distance runner, especially if you're starting to push the mileage, or at the very least, if you're somebody who is, trying to get into running, you're going to want to get to at least that 45% because you're doing a lot more movement, you're burning a lot more carbohydrates. That can actually get to be more than 55% if you're training for triathlons, more really heavy endurance efforts. But that's really where you should be. About half of your calories should be coming from carbohydrates, which I think maybe for the new runner, somebody that hasn't really done this before, might be surprising because of the information that's probably readily available out there on your various social media about carbohydrates, proteins, fats, what is the right thing for people. If you were to actually see a carbohydrate under a microscope, a simple carbohydrate molecule, and I'm not talking about when they're chained together, but it would basically be a circle. It's a very simple molecule, and that's why your body can use it when your heart rate elevates, when you're running, when you need fast fuel. That's basically like your body's rocket fuel. That is premium fuel, and your body has a very limited amount of it. So you have to be constantly giving that back to your body when you are running fast. Your body can store a little bit of carbohydrates in the form of something called glycogen. It can store it in the muscles that are working, and that's actually a training effect. When you run, your body will store more glycogen in those working muscles. And you can store some of it in your liver, and that can be moved where it's needed throughout the body. Your brain also stores glycogen, but once it's in your brain or the working muscles, it can't go anywhere else. So we have a very limited store of carbohydrates. Basically, it's about 2 hours, and that's why people that have been into distance running, you hear about the wall in a marathon being 2 hours or a half marathon, whatever your race distance is. Typically, 2 hours is the threshold. That's because that's about how much a human can actually store at the most. You can maybe store a little bit more, but that's pretty much the theoretical limit. So that's carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are going to come from your grains, your vegetables are going to have carbohydrates. More starchy vegetables like your potatoes, your corn, that kind of thing is going to have a little bit more carbs. Your more typical vegetable-y type of plants like broccoli, your true vegetables are going to have a little bit less carbohydrates, and they're going to have other things in there as well. But that's generally what you're looking at is starchy carbohydrates. Starchy vegetables are going to have carbohydrates in them. So that's your fast fuel, and that's what you need as a runner. In terms of fats, that's the other way that your body typically is going to want to use energy. And a fat molecule, by comparison, so you've got your carbohydrate molecule, it's basically a circle. And anybody watching this, if you look up carbohydrate molecule, there's really cool graphics everywhere for this. But essentially, that's a circle. If you were to look at a fat molecule, it would be the exact opposite. It's this super complex triglyceride, fatty chains pinned together, and it's super efficient in terms of actually storing fuel. Because it's so complicated, though, your body can't use it at fast intensities, right? So this is where your daily movement, right now, me just sitting here, my body is going to be primarily using fat as a fuel source, which I think is confusing to most people, right? They might think, well, fat is where a lot of the energy is. Isn't that what I'm burning when I'm running faster? And the way I usually encapsulate this for people is if you were to go onto a treadmill or a stationary bike, you might see a fat burning workout or zone. And it's not typically super fast. It's usually a moderate intensity. Your heart rate's a little bit lower. That's when you're primarily burning fat. It doesn't mean you're burning more calories at that intensity, but there's a higher percentage of fat being used at it. And that's something that a skilled coach, if you're work with, depending on if they're dealing with things like heart rate training and things like that, that's all very tied into what the fuel source is. But for the sake of the conversation here today, a fat molecule is very good at storing energy. In fact, it's 9 calories per gram, where a carbohydrate is 4. So it's twice as good at storing, but your body just can't use it at a fast intensity. So you're going to be doing that on your low intensity, what you might call a zone 2 run, depending on what your training plan is. That's going to be primarily from that and your daily activity. So in terms of for a distance runner, you're going to want carbohydrates and fats. And when you start to increase the intensity, when your heart rate goes up, that's when you're going to rely a bit more on carbohydrates. So, for the sake of the discussion here today, getting very sort of general, if you're running faster, you're going to want to even have a little bit more carbohydrates. So, if somebody's doing, say, a tempo run or especially a long race or something like that, that's where you would carb load. Most people have probably heard about that before a longer race. So, that's why you're primarily focusing on carbohydrates, where fat, you can do that at the lower intensities. And then the third macronutrient that the third one is going to be protein. That's the one that's really sort of emphasized on social media now. Basically, your body doesn't want to use protein for fuel. It wants to use protein to rebuild muscle. And that's where a distance runner should really look at protein, is after a run, rebuilding after an effort that you've done, maybe a hill effort, something that's especially strenuous. You're going to want to have all of those things, but a little bit more protein afterwards than before. Because again, your body doesn't want to use that for fuel. So if we're trying to fuel a runner in particular before, that's where you're going to want the carbohydrates. You're definitely going to want fats, but you're probably not going to want them right before the run. Again, for the reason that I was saying, it's hard to digest, it's slower. So generally speaking, a distance runner is going to need more carbohydrates than your general people walking around. And you're definitely going to want to emphasize that before, much even more carbohydrate heavy before a run, before a harder effort. And depending on what you did in that, that's going to break down what you're doing afterwards. So that's the generality of those macronutrients and how your body's going to process them, what your body wants to do with them. Now, you can put yourself in a position to where you are using only fat and protein, but you're never going to run fast that way. You're always going to limit your actual ability to run and run for longer, harder efforts if you're not giving your body the primary fuel source. That is the carbohydrates. That's your premium fuel if you were going to a gas station. Fat And again, we don't want to use protein as a fuel source. That's usually more for like if you're in a strange sort of thermogenic situation where you don't have any carbohydrates. But the fat is more like your diesel energy. It's low, it's slower, but it's powerful. You can use it for long periods. So that's the breakdown that a distance runner really should be looking at in terms of those three key macronutrients.
Interesting. I like that breakdown there. Putting a lot of emphasis on carbo. They're all important, but carbohydrates are just huge with runners.
And Julie, you said you need all three of these things. They're
Yeah.
macronutrients. They're the big ones for a reason, but especially those carbohydrates for those distance runners. Yeah.
Now, I will generally go based myself, and when I'm talking to patients as well, when they start talking about how they feel too. So I'll dive back into my history a little bit, but I used to count calories. I would have the app, Fitness Pal or whatever it was at that time, 10 years ago probably, and I'd put everything in there and would quickly realize I wasn't getting enough, right? So we
Right.
try to add more, but then I just started getting just like, I don't know, trying to track everything was just becoming stressful, right? So then I just started doing, okay, how do I feel? How's my energy? Am I tired? So I just started just taking in more food, more carbohydrates, and I feel better, right? You feel better in your runs, you just feel better during your day. So when you're working with a runner, how do you typically guide them on knowing what they're getting in carbs, fats, protein? I know we don't have to dive into specific plans. That can be a whole other video here that we can jump into those things. But do you go based on how someone feels and try to have them just add a bit more carbs and see how they respond to that with their running and during the day?
Yeah, and what I typically do, and full disclosure, I'm a certified sports nutrition coach, nutritionist, not a dietitian. Dietitian comes with much more training. Basically, a dietitian is a doctor of food, essentially, and they're the only
Mhm.
people really legally who can give you a true meal plan. And that's across the board. And that's a very specific thing. If somebody is in need of that, they typically are in need of a lot of extra support. Now, what I'm typically wanting people to do is I want to educate them basically on what we were just talking about. If I were to say we're low in carbohydrates, I would want my client to know what they should, what does that mean, right? I don't want them to
Mhm.
think, what is a carbohydrate? So typically what I'll do with somebody is I want them to track what they're eating for typically a week, because then you can't get any kind of weird outliers and things like that. And then I usually have them do that in a shared note, Google Doc, whatever it is they want to use. And I don't want them to get super crazy with it unless we're really, again, dealing with someone that's really chronically underfueling. But I just want to generally know, what are they eating? And that might be a conversation again for later on, but what are they eating? And then are we looking at as, wow, we've gotten halfway through the day and we haven't had a single carb or a single protein or something like that. And then I'll typically take them through what that's looking like. Hey, we are really heavy on simple carbohydrates and we're not getting fats and proteins to offset that, and the different micronutrients. I know we've talked about macro, but the micronutrients, your vitamins and minerals, essentially, we might be missing some of those things when we're looking at it. So that's typically what I'm doing with somebody, is I want to see, what are they eating? Are there clear things that we're missing? And then I try to break it down into these big generalities. If someone is very clearly missing something like iron, very important for distance runners, something I know we're going to talk about in future videos, is that's something we might want to talk about specifically. If I'm seeing we're very low on carbohydrates, that might be a conversation. Maybe they are scared of carbohydrates because of things they've seen online. It might be a conversation starter with that. And then we might again talk about what I was saying, and what is a more starchy carbohydrate, maybe one that can be a bit more satiating. Potatoes are fantastic. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, they are really criminally overlooked when it comes to this, because they have really great ability to keep people full. They have really great micronutrients. They're a really great carbohydrate, super great for a lot of people that are training for any sort of endurance effort. But are we looking at, do we need to get a little bit more protein? We might want to look to more like beans and legumes, something where we're getting carbohydrates and we're getting some protein and fat in there too. So I want to look at generalities. And then again, touching on micros, there might be something where a person has not gotten a single green vegetable all day. There's colors too that I want to look at. Are we getting things like that are green and red and blue purple? I'm trying to look more at generalities with this. But yes, you're to really answer the question you asked, if you feel like crap, there's something going on there, right? These what might work perfectly for me might not work for somebody else. And I might say potatoes are great. And if there's somebody that's looking and watching this video that hates potatoes and sweet potatoes, doesn't matter how great I think it is too. So you're playing both of those sides of things. So that's typically what I'm doing when I'm looking at what somebody's eating. Again, not giving meal plans, giving generalities with this, and trying to make this as simple as possible so people can actually apply it to their real life. You can make these things super complicated. There's reasons where you'd want to track calories, there's reasons where you'd want to do a lot of tracking protein, tracking fiber. There's a lot of things that you can track.
Mhm.
I want to give people like tools. Let's track this for a period of time. Maybe we come back and spot check it in a month or two to make sure we're still on track. But I think that if you put some of that effort in on the front end, really give yourselves the tools to know what and why you would be eating some of these different things, what the importance is, and why you'd want to have those for your goals. I think that's a better way of looking at it as opposed to just this has to be on your plate or something like that.
No, that's a great way to look at it because I always feel like obviously you're here to see me for physical therapy, right? But I touch on those things too of, well, let's make sure this is a PT thing. Obviously, we need to fix what is the problem, but if that side of thing, the nutrition side is not where it needs to be, then it's going to be hard for us to move forward with things. And that will also be another topic here, but trying to broach that topic with patients and understand how their eating is. Because when I do hear clean eating, I start thinking, what, okay, let's talk about that. Or you want to make sure you're getting everything that you need to get. I saw someone yesterday who was just wanted to come in for just a running analysis. And then we start talking about she's in menopause and she has been intermittent fasting and her hair is like she's losing her hair and she just was tired. And I listened to her for a while and I was like, I really think it would be great for you to see this sports dietitian because I think that she will help tremendously with everything that you're talking about right now. And we'll look at your nutrition. Her response was like, my nutrition's fine. I eat a couple meals. And so there's just a lot of education on that side of things. And when you don't know much about it or you just don't fully understand it, it can be scary to have to change how you're doing things. That's how you're used to eating, right? And that's what you feel has worked for you before. So it's just an interesting topic, more so recently.
Julie, you hit on some really key points there. Honestly, people think that how you run is only going to be how you train. I think that 30% of
Mhm.
it is going to be how you fuel, and that's going to be food and hydration. Probably about 40% of it is how you train, and then 30% of it, roughly, is going to be how you recover from it. And you can't do it without those three things kind of working in tandem. And you brought it up, it's not just a logical thing. There probably was something emotionally triggering with that client that you were saying, and that's something that we really have to get into when I'm working with a client. Is there an emotional side of this that you really have to be very cognizant of and also very sensitive to? Because food is something that can be super triggering. I don't think that there's
Mhm.
probably anybody in today's day and age where there's so much focus on appearance, so much focus on how things look on social media and how other people
Mhm.
look and all those things. And those are really key things that you really need to consider. I've had plenty of clients that I suspected that they might be chronically underfueling, something that we're definitely going to look at here. And those are important things, and to be kind, but also very making sure that you're doing what's right for a client, for someone that's coming in, for an athlete in my case, to make sure that there's not real long-term harm happening there. And honestly, the topic of fasting, I think something that is starting to go away a little bit. The only reason why people lose weight when they're fasting is because they're taking in fewer calories than they're bringing in. There's nothing magic about it. Some people, if they limit it and it can work great for them, but there's nothing super fancy. There's terms that people throw around, things like autophagy and all these different things about cleansing. Your body can cleanse itself. That's what it's meant to do, right? It's meant to clean itself and all of that. And so when you're dealing with somebody, when you're doing this, what you said is absolutely true. That the fueling is important, but it can be scary. But a really key thing to keep in mind is in order to see a change, somebody has to make a change, right?
Mhm.
So for that person that you were working with, suggesting that they actually see somebody who can really help them, that was the right thing to do, it really was. And You can't change the process overnight, but you can start that conversation. And typically these things, they might take, because there is that emotional attachment to this. And this, more than just it being food is our fuel, but it's more than just that for us. That's why we have things like family dinners and social gatherings around food. So I think that that's a really important conversation piece that you brought up, and something that definitely there is a point where you do need to refer people to experts in this field, because if somebody's hair is falling out or somebody is just chronically tired, there could be other things going on there, but yes, there's probably some chronic underfueling or something going on there where it's not really meeting. Going back to that last topic, if you don't feel good, it doesn't matter. It could be
Mhm.
following a lot of these different things, but there's something that's not really honed in, and there's obviously nuance and some specifics that work for different people. So again, if somebody works well on fasting, that's great, but fasted cardio doesn't necessarily work
Mhm.
better than something else. And there's some people that might feel good while they're doing it. There's some slight evidence in terms of certain really hard, longer evidence that if you do some training fasting, it's so nuanced and so specific. I don't
Mhm.
even get into it with most people. And it's a little bit there's a lot of things where you would really want to be working with someone specific on your fueling plan if you were to get into that realm.
No, for sure. There's a good book out, Roar. I don't know if you've heard of that, by Tracy
Mm-mm.
Sims. It's very female focused, but it discusses the difference between male and female. And it was a nice read for me because about some of those, there's just the differences between fasting for women versus men, and what time of day it's okay to do those things, and just with hormones. So there's just so many differences that we could hop into between male and female. It's definitely a good book to check out. It goes a lot into body type. So my husband, he's more of a lifter, bodybuilder type body. He can fast, he can lift, he just works well with that. I'm the opposite of that, right? Just like lean, just a skinnier and a runner's build, and you have to make sure I'm getting up in the morning and eating right away, right? And especially and it's all individual, right? Your mom, your perimenopause, your menopause, your young individual, your guy, your dad, just whatever is going on in life. So I'm sure you make it very individual to what that person's what's happening with that person in that moment. So, but I'm
Right.
sure carbs is always number one up there, regardless, right?
It
So,
really is if you're trying to do anything endurance wise. Once your
yeah.
heart rate starts to creep over, especially if it's over 140, 150, you pretty much can't. There's no can't in anything that's a biological process, but essentially you can't fuel it for the most part with fats. You only need carbohydrates. And those are the workouts that are going to help move somebody's fitness if they were to start dabbling in maybe even doing a race or something like that. But most people,
Mhm.
with their training and everything, you need, again, that 45 to 55%. And then that goes into, if you're taking an off day, that's an opportunity. And if you want to have more of a protein heavy, a fat heavy, you could reduce the amount of carbohydrates on those days. Maybe if you're doing a particularly low intensity, short run, off day, that kind of thing, then you don't need quite as much as that. That's why there's a pretty big range there when it comes to carbohydrates, too, and what somebody's goals are. If you're going out and you're doing a hard tempo effort where your heart rate's going to be over 150, 160 for a sustained period of time, carbohydrates absolutely needs to be the centerpiece, but it doesn't always need to be the centerpiece. If you said it's an off day, you're traveling and you're only doing a short run or something like that. So that's the other thing too, is sort of matching. The carbohydrate is the one that's going to fluctuate the most in your, and that's what the evidence would say. Typically, the amount of protein, and again, depending on what plan you're on, we've all seen those, the amount of kilograms per body weight for the amount of protein you have. There's different ratios in that where you'd want to go. That typically doesn't change, or you might have a little bit more on an off day. Fats typically between 25 and 35% of your calories, depending
Mhm.
on what you're doing. But your carbs definitely is going to fluctuate the most based on your activity because of what you're doing with it. So that's
Yeah.
typically where I'm sort of looking at it for somebody and everything. So the carbs is going to fluctuate the most, but typically a distance runner, especially if you do start getting more into it, you start to increase the mileage. Maybe you want to, again, train for your first 5K, 10K, whatever it is that you're doing. That's where that importance definitely kind of goes up. But like you said, these things are, it depends on the person, depends on the goals, depends on what they're doing. And it depends on where they're starting. Like we said, you've got to get things going. And if you're dealing with somebody who's afraid of carbohydrates, doing very few carbohydrates, just getting them maybe to 25% might be a great win and help them start to feel better with their running and everything. So that's how you would want to I would want to work with an athlete that maybe is in that position or maybe is just starting to get into it. The carbohydrates can fluctuate in an ideal world. We're not always dealing in an ideal world, but those are the goals that you're going to want to move toward.
Awesome. So I think a big takeaway from today is just understanding the difference between those 3, and I think what you can go home and do today is just see how you feel in general. Not that you need to go write down everything you're eating, but how do you feel during the day? Just try to make note of that, how you feel, maybe what you're just think about what you're eating and what maybe you can add based on how you're starting to pick up your running. And then if you were to get stuck, reaching out, whether if you're not sure of a nutritionist or dietitian in the area, maybe reaching out to your family doctor or whoever that you're seeing that you have a good relationship with, that you could ask for recommendations in your community. But I think definitely if you have some of those things going on, for sure, go to someone that can help you figure out a good plan.
Yep, and help you understand it too, so that
Yeah.
you can really take it and make it your own, so that you can actually make those decisions, make those smart choices as you're getting empowered with that information.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we will continue to talk on this topic. I think there's a couple of videos that will come that we can continue to elaborate and dive into some of the details here. So thank you, Kyle. I appreciate your
Pleasure.
info there, and I'm sure everyone will have learned a lot from this video and can go home and just start applying.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you for checking out our video. If you would like to learn more about rehab and all other things running related, feel free to head over to our Skool community. There are a ton of good free videos there for you to check out. You can find that link in the description below.